First of all, I'd like to thank Legis for the invitation to take part in this conference and apologize on behalf of my director, Rania, who couldn't be here today due to other obligations. On her behalf, I will shortly present to you the violations of human rights that we have noted during the refugee crisis, starting from the mid of 2014 and until today. All the violations that we have noted according to the European Convention for Human Rights. The testimony that we saw just before is a strong reflection of what I'm going to speak about, because all the human rights violations that we noted are reflected in this testimony that we just heard. I would like to start first by saying that we have, in our experience, in our work with the refugees, we have noted the violation of at least 11 human rights that are predicted within the European Convention for Human Rights. And as our moderator said before, it's not only that humanity failed to deal with this refugee crisis, but it's also the human rights standards, the international human rights standards that have failed, and thereby all the countries that have signed and ratified the international conventions for the respect of human rights. I will start first with Article 1 of the European Convention for Human Rights, which is the right to the obligation of the state to secure and guarantee the respect of human rights of all people within its jurisdiction. I think this is very clear with the situation of the refugees, given that their rights have been violated during their stay on the territory of the Republic of Macedonia. So the country did not only have the obligation to provide for their rights, but it also had the obligation to take specific conducts and investigations in the violation of their rights, which of course the state did not do. Article 2 of the Convention is of course the right to life, which has been violated in many cases with the refugees who transited through Macedonia. I believe there are more than 30 people, around 30 refugees who have lost their lives in Macedonia while on the territory of Macedonia. One such case, for example, was in April 2015, when a group of 14 refugees died on the train tracks in the Republic of Macedonia. Now, we don't find the guilt of the country in the fact that the refugees died on the train tracks. They were hit by a train, and of course this was ruled as an accident. But the country did have the obligation to investigate and to provide for sort of guidelines for the refugees not to be on the train tracks in the first place. In this period of time, the refugees were only supported by volunteers and individuals and some organizations that work on the field, but they did not have clear signs on where they should move, on where they should cross the country. So of course this was one of the places that was dangerous and that could have brought to the loss of life, which actually happened in this very case. The next article, Article 3 of the Convention, which is the absolute prohibition of torture. As we saw in the testimony before, and then as we saw in the situations that were happening in the camps, in the transit camps, and in many places in Macedonia, refugees were beaten by police officers on several occasions. Excessive amount of force and unnecessary force was used on the refugees by police officers. And from our experience, the state has not taken any investigation to solve these cases or to bring to accountability those police officers that have beaten the refugees and tortured. The violation of this article has also happened within the acceptance centers in Skopje, the acceptance center for foreigners, which has been overcrowded for a long period of time. It has the capacity of almost 150 people, but at one point there were more than 350 refugees placed within this acceptance center in Skopje. The conditions there were of course inhumane. There was a lot of overcrowding. The hygiene was on a very concerning level. Their private life was of course violated as well. Article 4 of the Convention, which is the prohibition of slavery, we also consider it to be violated exactly because of this testimony that we heard before. So as you heard Dalir, he said that people were held within a house in Macedonian village near the Serbian border. They were held in captivity. They were held as hostages because they couldn't pay off the smugglers in order to let them go. So this was a process. This lasted for a period of time, and this was first revealed by a British news media, by Channel 4. There was a story in June 2015 about more than 300 people that were held captive within a house in Vaksince near Kumanovo. It took after the publication of this story, it took our police more than a week to conduct an investigation within the village of Vaksince and to find these people. Of course, they did not find all the groups because, as you heard in the video, they were warned. They probably knew that the police was coming, and they just moved the refugees to a different house, to a different location, and dissolved the group so they couldn't be found. So we think that the state has a strict obligation to conduct effective investigation in the violations of this human rights of the refugees. When it comes to Article 5, the right to liberty and security, we think that this human right was violated with the simple fact that the refugees were held in sort of detention in the camp in Gevgelia for 1 year specifically, some of them even more, those who didn't leave the camp after 1 year. The people that were held in the camp in Gevgelia did not have any court decision or any criminal investigation against them to be held in this sort of detention. Some will tell you that yes, they had the right to leave whenever they want, but this was not, of course, true. They could, and in the recent months, they could only leave the camp after they asked for permission and are accompanied by some of the organizations there. So if this is not the limitation of their right to freely move whatever they want, then of course there is a violation of Article 5 of the Convention. Article 6 is the right to fair trial and access to court. We also believe that this was violated by the simple fact that the refugees did not have any physical access to court. So they did not have, and this of course is in relation with Article 13 of the Convention, which is the right to an effective remedy. So they did not have the available mechanisms within the country in order to appeal their detention in the transit camps. So they did not have any available resources to use to object them being held in detention in Gevgelia. I think it's not very necessary to elaborate the violation of Article 8, which is the right to private life, to private and family life, because the refugees that are held within the transit camps are placed in very small houses, which are, I believe, 12 square meters, and there are families of 6 people who live in this very small room, exactly one room, which is of course a strict violation to the right to private life. The right to religion and to practice their religion. So there were no prayer rooms in none of the camps, on none of the transit camps. I was in Tabanovce just recently, and for the first time I saw that there was one room which was marked as prayer room. And this is the first time after 1.5 years since the refugees are in the camp. In Gevgelia, I'm still not aware that there is a prayer room for the refugees, so they just have to do their religious practices somewhere where they find convenient. Article 13 of the Convention I already mentioned, which is the right to an effective remedy. So the refugees did not have access to any of the effective national remedies because they are simply without any regulated status within the country. So legally they do not exist within the country, and thereby they don't have the right to appeal their detention or to appeal any of the conditions that they are held in. Article 14, which is the prohibition of discrimination. We believe that the state has violated this right by many practices. One of them I will mention is the price of the train ticket in the period when the refugees were transiting through the country in an organized way. So they had to pay a train ticket from Gevgelia to Tabanovce by the price of 25 euros. This, of course, we consider to be discriminatory towards the citizens of the Republic of Macedonia, for which the train ticket costs much less. Another discriminatory practice was introduced when the state started to let through only refugees coming from first Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Then it was only limited to Syrians. This was, of course, a discriminatory practice that had no basis whatsoever, but was only based on the practice of other countries towards the Balkan routes. I will also mention the Article 4 of the Protocol number 4 of the European Convention for Human Rights, which is the right to the prohibition of collective expulsion of aliens. We had this violated in one specific occasion when a group of 700 refugees from Greece illegally crossed the border and came to the territory of Macedonia. At this point, the Macedonian police, the way it dealt with the case was they loaded a very large group of people, they loaded them in trucks and sent them back to Greece with no official procedure, without reviewing each case separately, which is their obligation under the convention. So this right, as predicted in the convention, says that this expulsion of aliens can only happen when every individual case is reviewed by itself. And this was, of course, not the case. This practice has also been seen by the Macedonian police with the so-called deportations, which happen on a daily basis. I say this in brackets because it's some sort of illegal deportation, because there is no official procedure, so this is not regulated in any law. They just put the refugees in one van and they push them through the wired fence towards Greece. Now this is without the knowledge of Greek authorities, this is without the knowledge of Greek police, this is completely secret and irregular procedure that happens. We have according to the president of the country himself, in one occasion he decided to, and said it proudly, that they have prevented about 18,000 migrants from coming into Macedonia, and he's referring to these groups which they have sent back illegally to Greece. So this, of course, happens before the eyes of the public. Everyone knows about it. I think even we ourselves have urged about this to the international community, to the UN committees, etc. But of course, no one is investigating these procedures. These are some of the rights that we have found to be violated within the convention. I'm sure there are also many more practices that we are not aware of, or it's difficult for us to know about, but it is more than evident that human rights violations have taken place. I would also like to mention that ever since the closing of the borders, since March last year, after the EU and Turkey deal, the smuggling groups came back much stronger, much more organized, and with much bigger prices. So what we've noticed is that ever since the closing of the borders, the refugees have been trying to find their way to cross towards Western Balkan country, towards Western Europe countries by using smuggling groups, but this time they had to pay much bigger amounts to the smugglers. So for example, if from the testimonies of the refugees, if before they were paying about 500 to 800 euros to come from Greece to Tabanovce, now they were paying 1,500 euros. As we heard from the testimony of Dalir, we've also heard it from refugees who transit through Macedonia, that oftentimes they have been tortured, beaten by the smuggling groups. They are held captive until they provide for the money that they have promised the smugglers. And it also very often happens that they pay the whole amount to the smugglers in the beginning of the trip, and then they only leave them to Gevgelia or to Tabanovce without taking them further to Belgrade or to whatever they have promised to take them. So they're constantly being lied by the smugglers, they are being beaten, they're held captive, which is of course horrible, and none of the police authorities are investigating these cases. Another problem is that so the police it happened very often that the police has organized actions to tackle smuggling groups which are located either in Lojane or in Vaksince, and people know about them. So the police has not conducted specific police actions to tackle these groups, but they just consider smugglers the people who they find on the roads in Macedonia who are transferring refugees. So, for example, in the since June to December last year, we have noted about 37 cases in which the police has found smugglers who are transferring migrants from one point to another in the country. They often consider these groups as, well, they don't really call them victims of smuggling, but they just call them migrants. They do not register them in any official investigation. They just conduct very short conversations with them and then send them back to Greece, again by this illegal procedure of deportation that they consider deportation. So there's no official procedure that actually tackles the smuggling within Macedonia. We all know, at least the people who work on the field, know how many smuggling groups there are in Lorane and in Vaksince, but the state just simply ignores that. Thank you very much. That's all from me. If you have any questions, we can discuss later.
Thank you, Elena, for sharing this very interesting and important information.